Good afternoon and most welcome to 988. We have now changed position to the actual university called in Swedish the Humanist, or the Center for the Liberal Arts, I would say in English, or the Humanities. I would today talk about demanding knowledge and tension. In the previous lecture I was mentioning Bertrand Russell, who excluded certain centers of understanding and focusing on one partial bit of the whole lot and going in and concentrate, so to speak. And that meant that after a bit he felt a lack, an absence, an original absence, because he had already divided what he was supposed to think about preemptively. That is called out of sequence, wrong order. We have mentioned that before when we talked about cardinal and ordinal numbers. That is very important. But if it's out of sequence, the only thing that can heal the sequence is going back from where you started and fix it. Second, the determinations you do. The categorization, the analyzing, the intellectualization, the abstraction you do is not going to be perfect. It's going to be out of sync, out of place. So out of sequence leads also to a division, so to speak. I'm just going to make a square here to signify a division, but you won't be able to do precise things anymore. It will be inaccurate to a certain degree, and it will be fuzzy, it will be sloppy. We talk about sloppy knowledge, it comes from this. And especially in the case of Bertrand Russell, I think it's maybe one of the first cases of this sloppiness, is for every time he changes and he moves on to something else. He was a solipsist for a while. That meant that everything he had in here was negated. That is why I put in the negation sign here. That means that now he will only have half of what this is. And still the exclusion of the whole is even more. And from every time, those pieces of the cake will be smaller and smaller and smaller. And that fitted perfectly with Bertrand Russell himself. He got more and more tensed, more and more crouched. He slouched incredibly at the end, and he looked really wasted. It's a person that is broken to every level, especially intellectually broken. People who met him at an old age saw that he wasn't the smart fellow he used to be anymore. He was blunt, he was aggressive. And when we speak about Bertrand Russell, I come to remember my old professor. He's an emeritus today. He was in linguistics, and he had a special trick. He said, demanding what was knowledge about, ordering. And to prove his point, he changed his mind. Not like Bertrand Russell, but intentionally. And he wanted his doctorates to follow his new line. And thereby he proved his power, but he's also proved that there is no real world, and he loved that. He thrived on that. And he was also very, very careful when somebody had an opinion of themselves. First he listened in, and then he came with a response, and that response always started with a laughter. How can you be so? And that was a technique that actually spread from his institutions to others. And I would say he was very typical of the new knowing, the new way that knowledge is something that could change on the whim of the professor. And by letting his doctorates and also his students follow his lead, whenever he changed direction, he showed that it's actually the professor is the one who's created knowledge, or the institution, I think he would say. And this is what we call conceptual knowledge. And this is when we only have the concepts. And I think we've been aware of this tendency for a long time, but our way of solving it makes it worse. Abstracting makes us not understand what we say. We get distance from what we're talking about. It doesn't seem to mean that much. So what is the solution? Well, if you are in the metaphysics of presence, you do just the opposite. You say, well, get rid of all abstraction. Don't do anything more intellectual. Go back to nature. And I would say that was the idea of Rousseau, the noble wild man. We had to give up intellectuality and so forth. And that actually spread into the 20th century, and I would say the hippie age was sort of that business. They wanted to negate the old intellectuality and become natural once more. Walk around naked, having sex in the nature, drinking alcohol and doing drugs, injecting, and we got a whole generation of lazy people. I think that's a typical solution for the metaphysical presence. What we should do according to this is expand. So if one of these things are the abstract thinking, why not expand the whole thing and let abstract be part of the whole? So then you can keep the abstraction, you can make it sharper, because the more you take in, the greater sharpness in detail you get. This is the message both from neurology and, I would say, deconstruction. Derrida has one of the most careful readings ever done in modern time. And I think it's very close to a reading one could find, sorry, yeah, you can put a pause there. A reading that is very particular for the modern times, I would say. And I think it's a good way of comparing to Denken and Duncan. And this is this new thinking that established itself in the late 18th century. The representational or the abstract. And this is the very one that Rousseau turns his dagger towards, so to speak. But the solution makes the whole problem even worse. Attacking the abstraction makes that you create another slot, which is the negation of abstraction. And there you're supposed to find naturalness, wildness, and actually original sense of life. All the things that you want to find. But you cannot find it by doing so. You will actually distance yourself even more. Kalle gave me an idea here. We've been talking about the hearing capacity as we have as human beings. And I remember when he mentioned it for like the 10th time. And I think the yoga also helped for me to regain the memory. But many years ago, I used to work with a hearing impaired, an association here in Sweden, which is particularly big here in Sweden, called Hörselfrämjandet. And in that organization, I had contact with a doctor who was at that time working in Karlskrona in southeast Sweden. And he said that when we learn to read in school, we make the mistake of tensing our hearing. Hearing is an active proponent of reading. It is a sort of internal reading. First, when you read, when you're very little, you sound the words. So instead of just seeing a whole sentence or whole word, you start demanding. And you internalize the sounds. And in the end, your mouth stills and becomes non-moving, on the outside at least. And your hearing takes the position of understanding reading together with the movement of your eyes. But there is a very interesting and important connection with the movement of the eyes over the text and your hearing, how it is functioning. Because there is a sequence here and there is a determination. Determination is what does it say, and the sequencing or the auto-sequencing, in which order should I put my eyes on the text. A lack thereof is the cause of dyslexia, according to this doctor, and I would agree with that. And that happens early on. Once established, it is very, very hard to change, because your whole system gets constructed from that start as sort of a sloppy or fussy reading of the word. And often when you see a dyslexic copying or repeating a word written, it looks like the word, but there is a missing vowel or a missing consonant, or there one similar consonant has been replaced with another one. Somewhere what has happened, and this is very interesting, the eyes came out of sequence and they took the role of the ear. Because what the dyslexic is doing is mildly copying what the eyes sees, not what the ear hears. What do I mean? Well, let me give you an example here. A typical writing of a dyslexic could be something like this. Instead of just writing charge, there's an extra consonant somewhere. And it looks similar. And that is why the eyes is doing the job when it should be the hearing. There is no Z in charge. And we have similar things here. This is from, I don't say who it's from. Very common, maybe the best known case of dyslexia in this country. And here it's a mimicking. It's a mimicking. And it's a mimicking from the eye. And you can understand the eye does do a good job here. It's making a picture of something that that person remember. But you see, it's much harder to write from memory. I can hardly, if I was supposed to write the t-shirt of Kalle here, it's a very interesting t-shirt. I think some of the words I will remember, Rembrandt and Monet, but I will forget some. Yeah, I think it's a good example to show you a t-shirt here. Some of these artists I would forget if I do it by memory. And this is what the dyslexic is doing, it's forgetting, which is quite natural. But if you use your ear and you listen into what you're supposed to write, you don't miss out, because you're doing internally the language. And here, oddly enough, comes in the tongue. Why is the tongue tensing on the roof of the teeth or on the bottom of the teeth? That is actually the silencing of the tongue. And it happens at the age 8 or 9, when you stop using open sounds to sort of sound the words, sound the letters. Charge. You don't use your mouth. You can see it. Pupils in this age, they become more and more silent. And sometimes they don't just silent, they force themselves to be silent. And how do you do that? You extort force on your tongue. You push it up so it doesn't move. So you see, this is actually adding to the problem. You should go slowly into this. You should internalize. This is called internalized speech. So you can hear it anyway. Because if I listen to someone, and even if I try to sort of speak to myself, if I'm going to make a speech of some sort, I will speak to myself and I can actually hear how it sounds. But when I do that, my talking should be free. The tongue shouldn't be stuck. I shouldn't tense my tongue, because that is going to hinder the reading. This is really odd. It also hinders the thinking. And that's the other side. So it's like two-sided business. First, we want the student to sort of, well, we don't want to, but that is usually what happens, to exclude things in his or her environment, to focus on the text. It's a little bit like put the text in front of someone, now you're going to write different words. Concentrate on this. And there are loads of things that are luring around the poor pupil. And one of the solutions for the poor pupil could actually be, instead of internalizing concentration, meaning that the pupil can concentrate on the book. You can hand me a book, maybe the red one there. You can concentrate on the book, read the book at the same time as that person is still keeping his or her attention around her. And this is a playful attention. But what could happen, you start to press your tongue at the roof of your teeth or at the bottom of your teeth, and you are physically, and this is why I wrote tension here, because look at old Bertrand Russell, there's a tension going on. We exclude with muscular force the surrounding area in an attempt to get concentration. This is what we want. We want to focus, and we put too muscular effort. We don't let the process take its time, and it becomes effortful, it becomes unbalanced. I can tell from my own sake, I really strive to get concentration. I was one of those people who had too much energy and everything was tempting me in class. Somehow I managed to get the concentration. It was not until 3rd grade, but I managed to keep my focus around myself. And I know that because I remember sitting on the chair feeling it uncomfortable, never ever using this part of the chair as my fellow students. I was always sitting right on my sitting bones, and when they changed chairs to make them slope downwards like this, which is very, very uncomfortable. This is for adults who already slumped. It can feel for a while more comfortable to sit in a back slope chair, because it gives you give your body a pretense of balance, uprightness. But it wasn't for a young pupil as me. I hated those chairs, and I began to use only 2 of the feet of the chair. So I was constantly sitting on the end of the chair, balancing myself the whole time. And it was my natural efforts of keeping my own balance, to the dismay of the teacher. So I really struggled to keep my balance, which was natural, and the teacher tried to correct me to slump instead. And I think in the end we got these very expensive office chair-like things, which you could screw and were on wheels, which was even worse, because if they're on wheels, how do you get a good contact with the floor? How do you get this nice balance that we need? But even those chairs I managed to balance on. And I was balancing on one of those chairs and it broke in the end, because I was wiggling too much and the metal got like eroded and broke. Then I got a big scolding. Do you know how expensive this chair is? And I remember responding, it sure is not comfortable anyway. Why did you buy those chairs? What happens is when we shut out the surrounding area, we lose out on both ends. We don't get the precision anymore. We never get the precision by shutting out things. We get a lack of precision. And this lack of precision is what you see in modern education. Both from the professors, he was really a forefront figure of lack of precision. He was sloppy, there's not even words for it. And he loved that sloppiness. He really bragged about it, because he shows that there was no substance to learning. And it was on his whim, he decided things. So he used his power. And when we went abroad with the institution, we did it 2 times. I remember especially when we went to Germany, where somebody said, it seems that the professor is telling you what the truth is. And we won't agree. And then we went to China and it was huge laughter. They see knowledge as something you have internally and you grow from. Whereas we thought in that instant, knowledge is nothing. It's just the new reinventing of words. or the power of the institution that says for the moment what's the knowledge. He always said knowledge should not keep more than 5 years, then it should be changed. Whereas in China, their knowledge was 3,000 to 4,000 years old. They were really crashed big. It's two different takes on knowledge. But I really loved his self-esteem when he said that. It should change every 5 years. Who should say that? Somebody else. Well, I say that. I say when it changes. And you write it down. That's Western knowledge in a nutshell. We have different takes on knowledge, and it can change in an instant. But I think what happens in the end, we get this lack of knowledge and we seek presence and we get fixated. And once we lose our balance, there is no chance we can get knowledge anymore, because we will not read anymore. We will not be able to perceive what other people are saying to you. And in the end, this is sort of a chaos system that is spiraling down, because for every time you lack your ability to hear, your hearing go down, and it goes down quite extensively, 5% every year. And once you lose at least 50%, it's more or less like chance. You don't hear what people say anymore. And that was also noticed from China. Some of my professors, Chang, he said, you see, when the professors are talking to each other, they don't hear what the other one's saying. It doesn't look like they're speaking to each other. They're speaking out in the air. And this is when you go under 50%. You don't understand what others says, and you don't even understand what you say yourself. This is when you come really well into this renaming process, and you lost all contact with an outer reality, and instead you construct your own reality. And as Bertrand Russell, well, he pretty much changed his opinion on philosophy every 5 years, and every time he went to the opposite. So if he started out like a solipsist, he went over to the other end, the empiricism. And from empiricism, he went into cognition. From cognition, he went into epistemology. So he always went to the other way. And that is the case with modern education. Every 5 to 10 years, professors or writers, they change their view completely. And by then, they remain the same. It's just an antonym. This is the sign for the antonym. That's a contradiction sign. And the very idea that the contradiction is the absolute opposite, something different, is a lie in itself. It is never used that way in normal language, not any language on earth, and it has never been used that way. Actually, negating something doesn't do much in some instances, and it doesn't do anything in academia especially. Negating something just confirms what you have from the beginning. And that's this mythological idea of criticism, that could do any change. It cannot. It's the stopping of change. It's the very stopping of every change possible. It's the stopping of knowledge. It's the stopping of understanding. And he was very good with his criticism, and he criticized himself as well, and thereby hindering himself from developing his whole life. And he's just a shadow of his former self today. Shrugged and no-knowing and angry. This is what happens when you don't have knowledge to sort of balance up your system. And I remember what this doctor said. I see next lecture I can remember his name as well. But he was very keen on the idea that this had an effect on the whole system, because what he noticed with his patients who had severe tinnitus was also headaches. It's 80% of the cases, insomnia, tension in neck was present in 80 to 90% of the cases, back neck 60 to 65%. Pain in other regions was very, very common as well. It was what he called something of the really original cause of pain, because pain is a big problem today. It didn't used to be. I mentioned before my grandfather's father, who had broken his leg, and he walked into the doctor, and the doctor asked him, for just reasons, this is an exaggerated hyperbole, but still, there it proves a point. Don't you have pain? Because your leg has been broken and it hasn't healed right. It healed like in a really weird way. And he said, I didn't think much of it. He was halting, but there wasn't much to it. Now, 60 to 7% of the population is having pain as a problem. So pain is a big problem today. It wasn't, because people wouldn't be able to move if pain was a big problem for them. Nowadays it is. And tinnitus is often pain-related, and we don't know whether tinnitus is causing pain or it's you who just taking up your own signal, because this is what happens from the beginning. The signal you send out because of the weird worldview you've been imposed on, that every sound comes from outside, this in effect actually causes the problem. I don't know how that doctor said that, but I remember it now. He said something to the extent, I don't know, illusion of some sort. But it's interesting that the whole idea that the sounds are only coming from the outside could actually lead to you start hearing a sound and you start thinking, that's a real sound, that's a real McCoy sound, I'm going to give that the seal of truth. And then it starts. And I shouldn't even say this, because when I say it, I hear the sound. So you can see how it begins. I hear a clear sound in my right ear now. That's the sound that cochlea sends out to meet the outer world. Instead, in the patient believing it coming from the outside, he or she will reinforce the signal. It's the same thing that happens with an audio system where you get a feedback directly. If you're speaking on the phone and you have that person on the speaker as well, that will actually cause this of the sound going up. You heard that many times. This is how tinnitus starts. It's a feedback thing, a loop thing, and thereby you will try to hear automatically even clearer the sound, and thereby amplifying it, making it stronger. But God, I heard many stories. I think the weirdest story of somebody getting tinnitus, that person was on a boat, and it was somewhere in the Southeast Sea, and it was this flying fish. I don't know if you heard about it, but the flying fish swacked her over the face, and those are not really big fellows. But after that, she developed a tinnitus. And I couldn't see any connection between the flying fish getting in her face and the tinnitus. Maybe it struck her ear, but that's not enough to cause any damage. So after that, and the thing being so utterly rare, it's really weird, that will enforce it even more. And therefore, she in the end developed tinnitus. It takes in the vicinity 4 to 6 months. But with this method the doctor created, he could rid the patient of the tinnitus within a year. I don't know how the success value was for the long run, but I know within a year. But that was actually quite extraordinary, because in those days nothing could be done by tinnitus. They just recommended less stress. If it's too severe, you should be somewhere that you can't hear any sounds. And one of the effects is, if you're amplifying the tone, it doesn't reach out, and that means that you need to try to hear even closer. And those people usually have big problems when there is a surrounding competing sound, like having 6 or 7 people at a cocktail party, and that's called a cocktail party phenomenon. For them, it's really, it's impossible for them to hear what people are saying to them, and it also gives them nausea. So you see here an understandable worldview where we don't think that the outer world is only out there is very healthy. That in itself is a healthy start of reality. And the second thing is that reality changes with your perception. The idea of a static worldview out there that doesn't change will in itself cause a multitude of problems with your body, with your thinking, with your philosophy, but oddly enough also with your hearing. Isn't that interesting? And in cultures where they don't suffer from the idea of an outside world that's static, tinnitus is still a rare thing. And if they suffer from it, which you can actually get tinnitus in a mechanical way by listening to too loud music or something like that, that is where it's much harder to help. It can be lowered, it can still happen. But mostly in the eastern part of Asia, it's usually that mechanical effect of tinnitus. And then you usually don't suffer that much. And that used to be the case in Sweden as well. I interviewed one person, he was working at the wharf, and he was putting these nails down into the very foundation of the boat. And he did it with pressure, air pressure, like the pneumatic things. And he said the sound was so loud, so even if you screamed to other people, you couldn't hear them. And I asked him, do you suffer from tinnitus? And he said, yes, I really do. What I hear in my ear is the same portion as listening to a big waterfall, the Niagara. Are you bothered? I asked. Not at all, he said. And that, as long as you are able to direct your hearing elsewhere, you can still hear what other people are saying. And that was just an amazing answer. That person should be deaf, and probably he was deaf to some certain degree, but he could hear people. He didn't need a hearing aid. So, well, it's interesting. Would be also interesting to look out what it does to the eyes, our eyesight. I mentioned a little bit before about looking to specific detail and this zooming in feature of the eyes that actually give us myopia, närsynthet. And that's a whole complex of ideas of the world being out there, and that means I start looking for the world instead of sending out signals to the world. And I think that has to conclude afternoon's last lecture. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.